this hour. The last time they voted for governor down in Texas, this is the way Texas voted, if you break it down by race. White people in Texas voted for the Republican in that race by a 40-point margin. African Americans in Texas voted for the Democrat in that race by a 77-point margin. Latinos in Texas also voted Democratic overwhelmingly in that governor's race. Latinos voted for the Democrat by a margin of 23 points. Now, of course, in the overall sense, the white population was the largest proportion of the vote overall, so the Republican candidate carried the day in that governor's race in Texas in 2010, but the racial disparities were really stark. Same thing in the presidential race in Texas in 2008. It was Barack Obama running against John McCain. White voters went for the Republican by this huge margin. This does not mean that 47% of white people voted Republican in Texas. It means that white people voted for John McCain by a 47-point margin. Black voters picked the Democratic candidate for president by a 96-point margin. The black vote in 2008 in Texas was 98-2 for Barack Obama. For Latinos, it was a similar huge margin for the Democrats. The Democratic ticket did better than the Republican ticket among Latino voters in 2008 by a margin of 28 points. There's just a stark racial divide in the voting patterns in Texas. Again, this is the 2008 presidential race. I would show you the 2012 presidential numbers, too. But weirdly, Texas did not get exit polled in 2012, some sort of cost-saving measure or something. So there aren't 2012 numbers. But you can see between 2008 and 2010, there is a consistency over time. In the last governor's race in Texas in 2010, there was also a disparity in income. Households making over $50,000 all went Republican. Households making under $50,000 all went Democratic. Same thing in the presidential race in 2008. Over 50 grand, they voted for the Republican. Under 50 grand, they voted for the Democrat. So if you're a Texas Republican and you're looking at numbers like this year after year, you've got to be thinking, if only there were a way to keep these darned poor people from voting. If only there were a way to single them out to make it harder for them to vote, that would be good for Texas Republicans. And, honestly, same thing for Hispanics. Latinos in Texas are almost 40% of the population. That's from the census in 2010. But in the election that year in Texas, the proportion that turned out to vote was not 40% Hispanic. It was less than half that. You're a state with 40% Hispanic turnout, 40% Hispanic population with 17% Hispanic turnout. And Texas Republicans have to be saying thank God for that. Because look at how Latinos in Texas vote. If more of them turn out, Texas Republicans are sunk. Right? In 2008, Latinos go for Democrats by 28 points. In 2010, Latinos go for Democrats by 23 points. So Texas Republicans have got to be thinking, we have got to keep these folks away on Election Day. There's got to be a way to keep these folks away from the voting booth. And there is. The Associated Press has done a new study of the Republicans' changes to the voting laws in Texas. They have found that the draconian new ID law that Republicans passed in that state is essentially a prescription calibrated precisely to solve Republicans' problems in Texas. Look at how this works in Texas counties. Take Williamson County and Hidalgo County. Both of them have less than 1 million people. But Williamson County is pretty well off, and it's pretty white, 65% white, which is pretty white for Texas. Hidalgo County is a really poor county, and the population there is 92% minority. The AP today goes through the records from both counties, and they find that, in the mostly white county, less than 3% of the voters in that county are going to have any trouble with the new ID law. People in that county have the ID that you need to be able to vote. But in Hidalgo County, the percentage of voters, legal voters, who will no longer be allowed to vote because they don't have the right ID, that's over 9%. Problem solved, right? Same thing holds true in the big counties, in the urban counties, like Bexar County and Tarrant counties. 1.8, 1.9 million people in these counties. These are big counties. Bexar County is in San Antonio. Tarrant County is in Fort Worth. These counties are similar in lots of ways, except Tarrant County is mostly white. Bexar County is mostly Latino. But the ID law is going to affect voting in these counties in a way that is really perfectly suited to Republicans, because the number of people who are legal voters but who are going to be turned away from voting because they don't have the right documentation, look at it, it's 2 to 1. It's 2-1. In the white county, it's only going to affect like 3% of voters, but in the Latino county, it's going to be more than double that. Overall, this new AP analysis of voter lists from every Texas county finds that counties with higher poverty rates or a higher proportion of minorities had higher rates of voters without IDs. So tomorrow is Election Day in Texas, just as it is all over the country. But thanks to the new voting laws that Republicans have pushed through in that state, that playing field in Texas is on a nice steep angle, right? And it's going to stay that way unless Democrats find a way to get that law thrown out. In Texas tomorrow, even though they have made this big change to who is allowed to vote in the state, it is a fairly low-profile election tomorrow. It's just a bunch of constitutional amendments and some municipal races that are going to be on the ballot tomorrow. It's not a high-profile race there. But that dynamic that is at work in Texas about who's going to be allowed to vote, that dynamic is happening all over the country, including in the state that is the highest profile race in the country tomorrow. And that, of course, is in Virginia. In the Virginia elections tomorrow, they're going to be electing a new governor, a new lieutenant governor, a new attorney general. Ahead of tomorrow's election in Virginia, the Republican-controlled Board of Elections forced counties in that state to throw tens of thousands of people off the voter rolls, with no clear instructions for what happens to those people if they turn up to vote tomorrow and they find that they've been struck off the voter list. Counties are not being required to notify voters that they were purging them, and they've purged more than 40,000 people off the list. So 40,000 people have been purged. Who knows how many of them have been notified that they've been purged? They're going to turn up to vote tomorrow with no notice that there's been any problem and no indication of what should happen once they point that out to voting officials. So tomorrow may be a weird day at the polls across Virginia. In the past, Republicans have not liked to admit publicly what they will sometimes admit privately, and what has become an article of political science faith, which is that lower turnout elections benefit Republicans. Higher turnout elections benefit Democrats. That's always been sort of a known thing in political science and something that Republicans will talk about behind closed doors and in sort of the conservative movement. But for some reason this year, this has now become something that Republicans are no longer embarrassed about. This has become something that Republican officials will actually get less shy about saying in public and to reporters. So in Virginia, heading into tomorrow's big statewide race, the chairman of the Virginia Republican Party did an interview with Politico this weekend in which he just blatantly prayed that people don't turn out to vote in his state. That's the Republicans' only hope to get Ken Cuccinelli into the governor's mansion, is if voter turnout is really, really low. The path for the GOP's gubernatorial candidate, Ken Cuccinelli, the chairman says, looks like this. If turnout is in the 30s, in the low 30s, we are going to win. Politico points out that in the last presidential election, voter turnout in Virginia was 72%. In the last governor's race, it was 40%. But the plan and the prayer and the hope of the Republican Party in Virginia this time around is that nobody turns out. They don't want to be at 72 or at 40. They got to be down toward maybe 32% or lower, and then the Republicans might get their way. That's the only way the Republicans can win. They think 32 is their ceiling. Below that would be even greater. Anything above that, they start to get into trouble. Plus, they've got the purge on their side, so there's that. Something has ticked over this year. Something has been triggered or unleashed somehow in this off-year election cycle where Republicans have become willing to admit this in public, that they really do not want you to vote. The fewer people vote, the better off Republicans are. It's happening in Texas. It's happening in Virginia. This is what it sounds like in Nevada. This is the leader of the Republicans in the state assembly in Nevada. This is him talking about why Republicans should all be hopeful about Nevada elections this year.
We have some real opportunities in 2014. This is a great year in an off-presidential election, probably where we had 1 million voters turn out in 2012. We'll have like 700,000. A lot of minorities, a lot of younger people will not turn out in a non-presidential. It's a great year for Republicans.
It's a great year for Republicans. Young people might not vote. Minorities might not vote. We might have a very small number of people voting. Wouldn't that be great for Republicans? That's how we can win. That's the only way we can win. This has become a very unsubtle, very overt thing in partisan politics all of a sudden. Today, on the eve of Election Day in Minnesota, a lawsuit was filed against the Secretary of State in that state, in Minnesota. Just a month ago, the Secretary of State, who's in charge of the smooth running of elections, after all, he launched this new website. In Minnesota, it gives you an easy way as an eligible Minnesota voter to register to vote online. The Secretary of State is a Democrat who put this up in Minnesota. In the month that the website has been up and running, more than 1,900 Minnesotans have applied to register and vote online. Applied to register to vote online. And 1,900 in a month is a pretty good pace, right? Especially for an off year when there's not that much going on in politics. It shows that people really want to register. They really want to register to vote, and if they can do it online, that is a very convenient way for them to do it. Today, a lawsuit was filed to shut down that Minnesota website, to stop the Minnesota Secretary of State from registering people to vote in that convenient way. Guess who filed the lawsuit? 4 Republican state representatives, plus 2 conservative activist groups in Minnesota. Heaven forbid that people be able to register to vote online. Then they might register to vote. And then they might vote. And that, of course, would be bad news. And so Republicans are suing to stop it. Republicans in state after state after state after state are increasingly openly and overtly admitting that the more people vote, the more that is a problem for them. But tomorrow is Election Day. In mostly low-profile races across the country, Americans have been turning out to vote early already or planning on voting tomorrow. In states where Republicans are in control, voting has mostly gotten harder over the past few years. In the Texas election tomorrow, in Dallas County alone, 1 out of every 4 voters has had to file a legal affidavit in order to try to get their vote counted because of these new laws. 1 in 4. In Texas, even the state government admits that something like 700,000 people in the state are legal voters, but do not have the ID that you need to be able to show to be able to vote in that state now. Of those 700,000 people, we learned today the total number who have been issued free IDs by the state of Texas so they can get their vote cast and counted. Out of 700,000 people who need these IDs to be able to vote, do you know how many people have got their IDs from the state? Out of 700,000? As of today, the number is 121. Not 121,000, 121. That is the latest figure we've got. We asked tonight, and that's what they told us. 121 out of 700,000 people. 121 legal voters who will be able to vote. 699,877, maybe not. Happy Election Eve. Good luck voting. You might need it.